Very good morning, students. Today we will discuss the last poem in your course of Unit 3, that is Language Politics, Hindi and Urdu. So the title of the poem is Hindi, and it has been written by Raghuvir Sahay. Obviously, it was written in Hindi, but it has been translated by Harish Trivedi and Daniel Wisibot, right? So, to its background, the poem has obviously the independence of India, 1947, and what Sahay wanna mention over here is that we did become independent in this year, but we failed to get a recognition to our language, that is Hindi, as national language. So this is what the whole focus of the poem is. Okay. So let's start with it. Nothing very complicated, very easy. Just keep in mind this background, that what Sahay is focusing on. So he says, we are fighting a language battle to change society. Language battle, the language to get recognition for Hindi. But the question of Hindi is no longer simply a question of Hindi. So it is not just language, it is about giving the language its national identity. Now what happened? He's telling you, we have lost out, we have lost the battle. Why? Because English is still used, और उसी कॉन्टेक्स्ट में ध्यान रखिएगा कि जो मैं बात कर रही हूँ वो इसी ईयर की बात हो रही है, इसी कॉन्टेक्स्ट में 1947 इंडिपेंडेंट इंडिया. English at that time was still the official medium. Okay, that is what is disturbing him. Oh, good soldier, know when you are beaten. And now that question, which we just referred to in connection with the so-called language battle, let's put it this way. Were we and those on behalf of whom we fought the same folk, that our leaders who were fighting for independence, right, and those who are fighting the language battle, he says, ye same hi log hain? Are they same people? No. He says because these leaders, after winning, they forgot that they have to give Hindi its identity, its recognition as an official language, as the national language. So he says these people were different because when they became leaders, they forgot this fact, right? So those who are the masters are slaves. So what happens in a democracy, the people are the real masters. Who are the real masters in democracy? Obviously the people, right? But their leaders, they treat them as slaves. इसको इस तरीके से समझने की कोशिश कीजिए. Okay, why? Because they are making them use the language which does not belong to them. He says we have got independence, but in Hindi is not being used as official language. Hindi has not got its recognition. So he says the use of English keeps reminding him that people are still the slaves of the Britishers, because we are using what? We are using a foreign language. Okay, this is what troubles him. So their slaves are those who are not masters. If Hindi belongs to the masters, then in what language shall we fight for freedom? तो लड़ाई अगर if Hindi belongs to the masters, to the so-called leaders, or to the people. If it belongs to people, then Hindi must be the official language. But then he says it is not clear who is fighting for what. So what is the issue? That if Hindi belongs to the masters, then in what language shall we fight for freedom? When everywhere, if we talk of constitution, if we talk of education, if we talk of all administrative works that are being done, when all are done in English, then that is a mere reminder of being a slave even now. That is what Raghuvir Sahay believes. Okay. So he says the demand for Hindi is now a demand for better treatment. That is the recognition which this language must get. So it is not, he says, the demand is not for rights put by agents to their slave masters. So the people who are being forced to use a foreign language, they use Hindi in place of English, while the fact is that their masters use English in place of Hindi. So this is very significant. The two of them have struck a deal. So he says that they have had a deal with each other. Okay, that the common people of India, they speak Hindi. But the rulers, जो हमारे leaders हैं या rulers हैं, they still continue to use the foreign language. So he who exposes this hypocrisy will dispose of Hindi's slavery. So hypocrisy is dikhava. When you stop showing this thing that you are independent without your language having a recognition, then you are just being a hypocrite. You are something else, but you're trying to be something else. So you are still a slave of the erstwhile British rulers. You are still a slave to our oppressors. That is what Sahay believes. So this will be the one who, when he speaks Hindi, will show us what simple folk really are. So the real people, he believes, or the real leaders, or the real masters for him will be who? Those people who use Hindi in their everyday life. So basically what it is, the poem is Sahay's effort, or his, he's sad about this feeling that Hindi has not been given its recognition. Again, I'm saying, हम बात कर रहे हैं 1947 की. At that time, it was more of English that was used, and Sahay को ये लगता था that we are still slaves because our language has not been recognized. So use of English is like again being slaves to the oppressors. And he says our so-called leaders, they are what? They are hypocrites, right? Because they have still not been out of the slavery of the Britishers. Why? Because they are using their language. Okay, so it says this poem, it was written shortly after independence of India in 1947, right? And at the time, the sentiment against British and their language. So obviously, the people were very much against the Britishers and their language, that is English. And here, what Sahay is trying to tell us, that though the battle for freedom of country has been won, right? We have become independent, but we have failed to do what? We have failed to won the battle of freedom of Hindi. Why? Because we are still the slaves of English language. All right. Now he says that he supports his view by saying that Hindi has not been made the sole national language of the country. It has not been given that recognition. And he says people who were elected by us, जिन्हें हमने elect किया after winning, after seeking independence, and then it was a democratic country, and the people we chose now, they were what? They were still the slaves of the masters. Okay, they were not masters who, they were like the slaves of the Britishers, because they were using their language. So, the new rulers who are elected by the common people and are supposed to be the servants of the people, they are acting like masters. They have preserved English as official medium of communication and are doing little to promote the cause of Hindi. And Hindi, he says, what is Hindi? It is the language of common people. इस बात को भी प्लीज ध्यान रखिएगा. That is why he's talking of this battle. On the other hand, he says the legacy of the British rule reminds the people of this earlier slavery. So he says, I do not want to continue with this. And he says anybody for that matter, any educated person who's using English as means of communication, as a mode of communication, is still a slave to the Britishers, because they have failed to win the battle for Hindi language. Okay, so here comes the title, that is Hindi. So it is all about the recognition of the language as national language when India got its independence in 1947. Okay, I hope it's a simple poem and must be clear to you. You can go through the questions that are given there in the book, and we may discuss the same in case any problem arises. Right? So with this, your unit is over, and in the class we will move on to the next unit. Thank you so much.